So today I'd like to get into Samson's story here, and what we're trying to recognize is who's the hero of the story to help us understand not just ourselves, but understand what goes around us also. So if you'd like to turn there, I don't have it on the screen. I haven't told them to bring it up, but if you'd like to go there, we're just going to read the first section of Judges chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. And it says this: Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. A certain man, Zorah, named Manoah, for the clan of the Danites, had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you are going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." And so this angel would present himself and state how this son, this boy that you're going to have, he's going to be set apart for God as a Nazirite, and he's going to be the thing that sets them free from the oppressive rule of the Philistines that they were put under. And as he grows up, you will find out through this chapter here that because he keeps that Nazirite vow, he has the strength to do amazing feats that we're going to read about, such as there's an army that comes to him, and with the jawbone of a donkey, he kills 1,000 men. He picks up the gate of Gaza with its pillars, so not just the doors, but the pillars the doors are on. And he picks it up, and he travels from one city to the other city. So who knows? Like this door, like some people would say, would be anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 pounds, depending on how thick the door is. But he would carry that door for about 30 miles to the next city. I don't know if you guys have tried, going from Vaughn's to here with just a gallon of milk and on your finger or whatever. But it's a long distance, But it's to show and demonstrate the strength that he had, and for him they would state that of the multitudes of how many men he was strong. Just to give you a quick story, do you guys remember Jesse Bear? I know he comes in here seldomly, but he's a big guy. And in high school, it was myself, Jacob Welch, Jesse Bear, and I think Michael Gonzalez. What we would do to kind of prank people sometimes is we'd grab a car and we'd lift it up just high enough to scoot it, and then we'd put it into another parking space. And we would just do that to make people try to look for their cars in the parking lot during the service and stuff. And for that's just 4 kids. You know what I mean? So if you're imagining Samson and the multitudes of I think it says the strength of 50 men, that's pretty immense. That's huge. If 4 high schoolers can pick up a car, 50 grown men could definitely chuck it. So that's just to demonstrate the power that God gives him through his Nazirite vow. And as long as a razor doesn't touch his head and he keeps his vows, God will continue to bless him. But as he gets older, we'll go into chapter 14 right now. We're going to look at verses 1 through 3. And it states this: once he gets older, Samson went down to Trinam and saw a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Trinam. Now get her for me as my wife." His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among our people? Must you go to uncircumcised Philistines for a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." And the Lord did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking to incursion from the comfort of the Philistines. For that time they were ruled over the Israelites. And so it's saying here that this situation was brought forth to kind of stir things in the direction that God wanted them to go to. But if we can make a mental tally in our heads of good or bad thing that Samson's going to do throughout these stories here, what Samson is saying is, hey, I saw this woman over in this city and I want her as a wife. And his parents are saying, hey, couldn't you just get a good girl over here rather than go over there? Like, let's say go to Las Vegas and find the most attractive woman you saw on the street. Did Samson have a conversation with her? Do they have the same interests? Did he even take a look at her dating profile to see if things lined up between them? And the answer is no. He just saw a woman on the street and said yeah, that's the one. And to put things in quotations, that's the one for me. And so it was just a lust-driven brain that would cause him to go out and seek this relationship. And while all of this is happening in the background, God is still directing and orchestrating things so that ultimately the people would be free. In chapter 14 and verses 8 and 9, we see, or even before that, Samson kills a lion and he tears it apart with his strength, and he leaves the carcass, but he doesn't tell anyone about that. And sometime later, in verses 9 and 8, he would find that same lion and see that there was honey inside of it. Sometime later, when he went back to marry her, or to the woman that he was now a fiancé to, he turned aside to look at a lion's carcass and see a swarm of bees and some honey, which he scooped out with his hands and ate and went along. And then he replied to his parents, then he rejoined his parents, he gave them some. And they too ate it. But he did not tell them he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. To go back to the Nazirite vow, the typical vow is you don't cut your hair for the time that you decide to do that for God, and you can either do that for special condition or just as thanksgiving to the Lord. It is not to touch anything with grapes or anything that's fermented, and then finally, not to touch any dead thing or any carcasses. And that's something that's pretty standard for all Hebrew people, is that you don't interact with dead bodies. And in this case, if you can imagine, your son or daughter doing that for you, where you're hey, I got some honey for you, and then you found out later that they got it from some dead cow on the side of the road, I imagine there'd be some irritation with that. And it sort of shows the selfishness of Samson, that he wouldn't even let his parents know, hey, I'm giving you honey that will defile you in front of the Lord. So let's put 2 tally marks for Samson doing bad things. If we continue on now to his wedding, this festival that they're going to have is going to take 7 days of just a feast that he's going to have with the Philistines. And in those 7 days, he would tell a riddle to those Philistines and make a bet to them. And he would say, hey, I have a riddle for you, and if you can solve this riddle in the 7 days or before I get married, I'll give you 30 linen garments, 30 linen garments. But if you lose, if you can't answer my riddle, then you give me those 30 linen garments. But the riddle he has is the one that only he can answer, because he's the only one who's experienced this. And his riddle was, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And they would spend multiple days trying to figure out what that riddle means, until eventually they would go to his fiancée and tell her, hey, if you can't tell us what that riddle means before your wedding date, we're going to burn you and your father alive. So she's under duress, and then talks to Samson and says, hey, I need this riddle. Please tell me this riddle. You don't love me. if I don't know, I'm supposed to be the one you trust. And when he tells her, she does tell those men during the party, and he is so angry. He has some pretty choice things to say about that also. But when he gives her the answer to the riddle, they say, what is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion? And he gets so angry that he tells, here, let me read it here. I have it written down. If you would not have plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. And so what he's accusing them of is he's accusing them of sleeping with his wife and getting the answer from him. And he's so enraged and angry that he goes down into the city and he kills 30 of their men, strips them naked, and then gives them their clothes and says, here, you win the bet, here's the clothing of your dead friends. And he gives it to them. And so you can see that in his anger, he would do this and go out and kill these guys who have nothing to do with this, and then would come back and then give them their clothes. And in all that, the father thought that Samson is so angry and doesn't want to have anything to do with his wife or his fiance, that he gives her to his groomsmen and says to Samson later, like, hey, I thought you guys were all broken up. I already gave her to your groomsmen. And he tries to sleep with her anyways, even though it's not his wife. And because the father won't let him in, what he does later is he gathers a bunch of foxes, he ties their tails together, ties a torch onto that, and then sets them free into the vineyards and orchards and fields for the Philistines. And they would be so angry with that they would burn the father and the daughter alive, and then go after Samson with 1,000 men to kill him, where he would then use the jawbone and break his vow not to touch dead things again. It says fresh jawbone that he would go out and strike them all dead with. And so you can see Samson is progressing in this place where he's still breaking his vows. He's acting on anger, killing people that aren't even associated with the problems that he has. And from this, he would eventually sleep with a prostitute, take the Gaza gates to be funny, I suppose, and eventually meet up with a woman named Delilah, which is probably the most famous part of the story. And when he meets up with her, he says that he loves her, and she is bribed by the Philistines. Hey, tell us what Samson's weakness is, and we'll give you all these silver shekels. And when she agrees, she tries to come up to Samson, and she says, like, oh, Samson, you're so strong. Tell me what your strength is. Where does it come from? And he says, like, oh, well, if you wrap me with fresh cord or fresh bowstring, I'm as weak as a baby. I just can't break out of it. To give you guys an example, do you guys know what violin strings used to be made of? It's just intestine. Like, I know it sounds gross, but old school like violin and strings and stuff used to be made of intestine, and that's what they used to do anyways. That's what they would make cord out of, because of how stretchy it is and how durable it is. And so he tells her something that kind of violates his promise to God, which is to be touched by dead things. And so that's what they wrap him up in. And then Delilah goes out and says, like, Samson, Samson, the Philistine army's outside. And so he gets up and he tears out of the cord, and he's out there looking for the Philistines. And then Delilah says, like, oh, Samson, you don't love me. You didn't tell me where your secret is. and Samson would go to say, oh, baby, I love you. Like, I just couldn't tell you what the secret was. And she's like, well, Samson, you got one more chance. Tell me what your secret is. And he says, okay, well, if you have fresh rope, just brand new fresh rope, and you tie me up with that, I can't do anything about it. I just can't get out of it. I'm as weak as a baby. And so she does that while he sleeps. And she ties him up, and she says, Samson, Samson, there's the Philistine army outside. And so he wakes up and tears out of him and goes outside, and she said, like, no, Samson, you don't love me. This is the second time you lied to me. I'm going to leave. She probably said something, my mother was right about you or something like that. And so he comes up against, like, oh, baby, I love you. Like, just give me one more chance. Like, all right, Samson, you got one more chance. And he finally, he tells her, like, okay, well, hey, if you put my hair in a loom, and I'm assuming he had dreadlocks because it says that he had 7 locks of hair. So it's either in 7 braids or in 7 dreadlocks. Who knows, like, what you want to think for that. But he says that if you sew my hair into a loom, my hair will prevent me from getting out of it. And she goes outside and says, Samson, Samson, the army is outside. And he wakes up and tears through the loom, and he goes out, and he's out there, like, looking for this army. And there's no army. So I don't know. Come on, Samson. So she goes back to it and says, like, no, you're lying to me. I'm getting my bags. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to my mom's place. And so then he says, like, okay. Like, but seriously, like, you can't do this one. Like, don't do this. Like, a razor has never touched my hair. It's the promise I have with God, and that's where my strength comes from. And so he goes to sleep on her lap, and while he's sleeping, she finally shaves his head while he's sleeping and cuts it all off. And then finally, the Philistine army is outside this time, and when she says he's out there, they seize him, and he's no more stronger than just a typical person. And so they take him to the main city, and they gouge out his eyes and, pull everything out. And then they put him in a mill where he's just forced to push a stone and grind wheat, like, for the rest of his life. And in that, eventually they would have a big party. And this party was for all the Philistines to see, hey, our God is greater than the Israelite God. We have Samson now. We're going to put him in in our temple, and we're going to have a big party with him there. And now that he's in the temple, he's filled with so much anger that he eventually says, Lord God, please give me the strength to kill the Philistines for what they did to my eyes. And so he would take those pillars and he would push the pillars out, and then that would come down and crush all the Philistine officials, high priests, and everyone else who was important at this party, and he would take his own life in that also. And I think let me reiterate real quick, because I'm trying to figure out who the hero of the story is. So a lot of times we think to ourselves, like, oh, Samson did, like, the courageous thing. He gave up his own life so the Hebrew people can be free. But what does he actually say? It says here, then Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just one more time. Let me go with one blow to get revenge for what the Philistines did to my eyes. So I guess my question is that, is he doing anything righteous right now? Like, is the taking of his own life and the taking the lives of these Philistines, is he doing that because that's what God's will is? No, he's just like before, he's so driven with anger, and everything that he does through the entire story is just self-driven, whether it's lust, hedonism, pride, or anger. There's no point in the story where Samson ever does anything redemptive in his whole story. And the reason why I wanted to paraphrase the story and go through this was because I want to figure out who the real hero is. You have Samson, who is going out and just trying to live up this party boy life, and at no point does he have a conversation of thanks for the Lord, or even points towards the Lord being like his strength. Because even then he says, like, no, my hair is where my strength comes from, and that's wrong. If I were to ask a random person, like, hey, where does Samson's strength come from? They'll tell me the wrong answer, which is that his hair is his strength. If we would have any children here and we let them grow to their adulthood and never let them cut their hair, will they ever be as strong as Samson? No. And that's because that's not where Samson's strength comes from. Samson's strength comes specifically from the Lord, and the Lord is where he gets that strength from. So there's no mistaking here. There's no voodoo ritual that you can do to get blessings. Blessings come specifically from the Lord and freely from the Lord. And the reason why this story is so important, especially if you understand it for what it is that in this story, God had set Samson aside to do what it is that Samson wanted, which was to free the Israelites from the Philistines that they were enslaved to. And when it was all said and done, despite how evil Samson was and how selfish he was through his entire life and how rage-driven he was, that God still achieved Israel's freedom through this evil man. And I think sometimes we have to recognize that we need saving too, and sometimes we need saving from ourselves. I was watching a testimony of this veteran who also lived through World War II, and the woman was trying to tell him, like, hey, you're a hero, and he immediately stops her, and just in all soberness, he says, like, no, I am not a hero. My friends who died, they're heroes. The people who died in that war are heroes. I just got lucky. God just wanted me to make it out. And I think back to Pastor Boyle and think back to, him making his promise to the Lord. And every time he tells that testimony, he never tells the testimony of, oh yeah, I was so good at what I did that, I made it out of there, or that I did anything worthwhile or achieving. He just said that I spoke to God and God blessed me and I made it out alive and I spent the rest of my life serving him because of what he did for me. And I think about this situation here and think to myself that for Samson was the villain of the story, and God still achieved his plan through Samson. And I think for us, the important lesson is that sometimes we don't realize that we're the villain in our own story, that we ourselves are the ones who keep ourselves enslaved to sin, and we perpetuate this need and drive to do the things that we know are wrong. And that God is desperately trying to save us from ourselves and from being slaves to that sin in the first place. Today is 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence. They were writing this out, and from July 2nd to July 4th, when the last signature was put on there, they finally had this declaration, and the declaration was to state that, hey, we do not serve Britain, we do not serve the royal family, we are here, and we are a nation under God, and we will continue to do that. And for you as individuals, you should understand and know that Christ is where we got our freedom from. And in Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, it says, for freedom, the freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. And he's trying to say here that the Lord has set his son, that his son died for you, and you have salvation and you have freedom from that, and to not go back to that and put yourselves back in the yoke of slavery. And it's so hard because of how our nation is driven now too. You can almost see the echoes of Samson in a country that was so strong but now doesn't serve or actively moves outside of the will of God, even though God is still blessing it. We can look around and see that everything is about you do you, and do what feels right. Pursue whatever crazy thing your heart wants, and at no point should you ever consider what it is that God wants for your life, because you are number one. You're your own God, and you go out and do what you want to do. And so what I want to say here is, do not be slaves to sin. Do not make the mistake of thinking that you're the number one God in your life like Samson did, and only pursue the things that please you. but to go forth and look for God and know that God is the one who set you free. And even on the macro scale or the entirety of our own country, that we need to change as individuals, and we need to submit ourselves to God as individuals in order to make change, even for the people around us and for their lives also. I love Pastor Boyle so much, and I got to carry his casket when his funeral finally happened, and I'm always going to be thankful for him, for what he's done. And I know that the things that he did, although I am thankful for him, that really the hidden hero in that story is still God. The hidden hero in this story is God, and the hidden hero that's in our own lives is still God, and that we should never forget him for the things that he does for us and the things that he's going to do for us and the things that he does for the people that we love too. We're going to have baptisms pretty soon, like Brother Ule had said, or Pastor Ule had said. Go see Frank. If we've forgotten what baptism is, or if you're deciding like, hey, I want to dedicate my life to God, or I don't know what this freedom is that you're talking about, the Declaration of Independence is the paper that says that we're free from royalty, and the baptism that we do is the outward expression of telling the world the same thing, that I'm no longer a slave to sin, that I have died to that, and I am alive, and alive right now because God made me alive. I was once dead, and now I'm alive. With that, let's have our music come up. Don't proceed in life and not know how God has moved in it. Don't proceed in life and not know what it is to be free. I know a lot of us come from backgrounds, whether they be through small beginnings of just being raised here at the church, all the way to coming from a background of drugs. There was a really awesome story that I heard from Sandy when we were at Bible study, and she was talking about how she had purchased some drugs, and she was planning on using those drugs at the house that she had purchased it from, and that she could hear this voice moving in her through God, saying, like, you put that down. You be free from that. And she put it down, and she walked out, and she said that that's not something that she ever wanted to be part of again. And that as she was walking away, the police would come and crack down on that house and bring everyone to jail to go get written up or extracted from that place. And that was part of her testimony of, I don't want to ever be that slave again. I don't ever want to be that person in bondage to the thing that her body craved. And so today, please think deeply on that. We're going to have some awesome tri-tip, and we're going to have some good food. And in the time of peace, we should think back to why we have that peace and why we have that freedom. The Declaration of Independence wasn't written because we wanted it to be written, and we just did it. People had to go to war, and they had to die for that to be the case. And your freedom that comes through Christ had to come from his death for you to be free. So please hold that close to your hearts. As the music is playing, if that's something that you want in your own lives, don't hesitate. If you feel like that's something that is echoing in your heart or echoing in your brain, even just by just the smallest amount, don't ignore that. Please act upon that, because God is the one who knocks on the door, and he's the one who wants to save you all.